Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's Talk Consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing good today. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good today. Thanks for asking. And we want to thank you all for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will be talking about the Kriya Yoga Sutras and the statements, constant practice of detachment and continuous control of the thought variations. In this show, we will be discussing how to demonstrate divine law by making thought buoyant with truth. Listen as we explain a little more about the causal spiritual body and its function in human development. Yes, how we think is what we become. Hear what happens when thought is freed from material moorings. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and experience union with divine. Swami, it looks like we have a lot of work to do this morning. So why don't we get started with the Kriya Yoga Sutras? What are they?
Well, what is called yoga was really codified by a man named Patanjali in about 200 BC. And what he codified, what he wrote down, are called the Yoga Sutras. And in the opening statement, when we talked about constant practice of detachment and continuous control of the thought variations, is one of the commands in these Yoga Sutras.
All right, so let's talk about the statement, constant practice of detachment. What does that mean?
Yeah, again, it's instruction, and it's instruction to do something very specific. Now, a lot of people refer to pratyahara as detachment. But in reality, what I found is that because of the physics of spirituality, because of the laws that we're working with, what drives the human organism typically is desire. And matter, which can't be created nor destroyed, only changed. What most people call detachment is really trying to give up desire. And what I found is that it's not possible, because you can't get rid of something that is backed by principle, that has divine backing. And so what I did find, though, is that we could change what it is that we internalize or what it is that we desire. And that's why the title of this show is Consciousness in Constant Relation with the Divine. Because in order to really actualize constant practice of detachment, an individual must separate from an attachment to the things that are visible and tangible, and then also separate from those things that are invisible but tangible, and then attach to what is invisible and intangible. That this concept of the divine, that spirit is the void or the nothing of this universe. And so for us to desire nothing is really the command. And then the other aspect of this particular precept is to continuous control of the thought variations. And this is something that we've been talking about in a lot of our shows now, is how we're thinking and using the mutable signs as the archetypes for human modes of thinking. Constant practice of thought variations really means to forsake human thinking And again, you can't just stop thinking. So what we have to do is we have to change how we're thinking, which means that we have to move beyond thinking with the lower mind, which is represented by Gemini, or thinking with the mid-mind, which is represented by Virgo, and then eventually giving up thinking with the higher mind, which is represented by Sagittarius, and then to begin thinking with the divine mind, which is represented by Pisces. And the reason why thinking with divine mind continuously controls the thought variations is because you are now plugged into what was called the void. Because you are now thinking with the divine mind. And the reason there is no thought that really appears is because nothing reports in our senses. Because spirit is whole and it's complete, and our lower mind, mid-mind, and higher mind all work on contrast, that when you move into the realm of spirit, which is unity, the realm of oneness, divine wholeness, there is no contrast. So there is no stimulation that takes place in human consciousness. And it gives the appearance of what they called no mind. But in reality, you are thinking with divine mind. It's a whole different mode of operation because you're moving from your outer five senses to your inner spiritual senses. And spiritual senses work on unity. They work on the absolute.
So it sounds like you just explained to us what is meant by thought variations. And the second part of that sentence in our summary was continuous control of the thought variation. So I think what's interesting to me is that word continuous in front of that. So to have an understanding what you just explained to us, now we have to put this into some type of application, controlling the thought, but do it continuously. I think that could be a challenge for a lot of us.
Right. It can be a challenge, especially if you're trying to do this humanly. The term that was used in the religious community was called conversion. See, yoga means union with the divine. And the term conversion really is when we are moving from a material sense of identity to a spiritual sense of identity, so that your whole mode of operation is now shifted from one who sows to the flesh, so to speak, to now someone who sows to the spirit. You can't vacillate with this, that you can't do it part-time, sometimes spiritual, sometimes material. That in order for this conversion to take place, in order for things to work according to the way the scriptures lay it out for us, that it has to be an all or nothing venture.
I understand. Well, let's talk more about demonstrating divine law. And then, if you don't mind, let's connect that to making thought buoyant with truth, and truth is with a capital T.
Yeah, the demonstration of divine law as opposed to the demonstration of karmic law. That the term in yoga that they use is called liberation, freedom. And in the Bible it's referred to as freedom. That we want to be free from this law of karma. Now, to demonstrate divine law, you must live out from it. That's why in the Bible it says, ask in my name. We must assume spiritual identity. That again is the physics of spirituality, that like attracts like. That in order for us to demonstrate divine law, we must live out from it. So we must assume the identity of it. And the next statement here, by making thought buoyant with truth. Now, the truth of our being is that spirit is all. Spirit is all, and spirit is good. And in Kriya Yoga, we refer to the causal spiritual body. Now, when spirit is cause, creation is perfect. The divine law is the law of absolute harmony. It's absolute life, absolute love. There's no mix of good and evil. There's no good that can become bad. There's no contest. There's no conflict. There's no struggle that takes place under divine rulership. And so, to demonstrate divine law, we must assume our spiritual identity. And in the Yoga Sutras, again, when you look at the 8 essential stages of yoga, the yamas, niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, these are all lifestyle recommendations that are very specifically designed to facilitate an experience that was called liberation or freedom. And it would lead to freedom from desire, freedom from the law of karma. Because when you assume your spiritual identity, you no longer have the baggage that comes with material identity. You no longer have needs, you no longer have fears, you no longer have any of the limitations that come with assuming mortality. You're no longer dealing with instinct, appetite, preservation, or survival. That you move into this higher law of consciousness, and this advanced consciousness that comes with spiritual identity is experienced as absolute peace, absolute harmony, absolute goodness.
Well, you mentioned the 8 stages of yoga, and there might be some people out there that think they have to do like one stage at a time. Isn't it more like that we're constantly moving between 8 stages? Isn't it a continuous action that's happening?
Yeah, it's an ongoing process. And when you start to look at the recommendations as strategies, things that we can do, and you start to see how when you start to employ skillful use of thought, skillful use of breath, skillful use of water, skillful use of food, skillful use of exercise, how that affects how you're thinking, how you're feeling, how you're performing. But the main thing here in Kriya Yoga is that your 5th yama, which is called brahmacharya, carrier of Brahman, is really where this whole thing begins. That carrier of Brahma means union with the divine. That the individual must establish their sense of well-being based on a relationship with the presence of spirit. Again, when spirit is cause, then you get a completely different return. One of the biggest misconceptions, I think, that is happening in the yoga community is the emphasis on the physical body. And even, I think, leaning towards maybe even the whole medical model as being considered an assistant to this spiritual science. And what they'll find is that you can't mix material law and apply material law and expect to get a spiritual return. That nothing works like that.
Well, I think this is a good place to pause to hear a word from our sponsor. So listeners, we will be back with you in just a few moments. Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Apotheosis is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. You cannot lead someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. And welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, I'd like to get back to talking about thought. And in the summary, we have a phrase that says, thought is freed from material moorings. And I wonder if you could explain to us what that means to you, the phrase material moorings.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about, the forsaking human thinking. The material moorings is really the testimony of our five senses. It's all the information that's coming in to human consciousness that actually comes from a dimension of reality that is apart from spirit. That in order for something to manifest, it has to split from unity, manifest in half, and then leave behind this complementary, unmanifested other part. And our preoccupation with human thinking, with these material moorings, really prevents us from elevating consciousness into spiritual awareness.
Okay. So how do we take that, what you just said, and apply it to thought and what you were saying before, how we think is what we become?
Yeah, our optimal position here of how we think is that we want to think with divine mind. Divine mind is the will of the Father, like what we had talked about in our last show, that divine law is the law of absolute goodness, absolute eternal life. As long as we are in awareness of the presence of this miracle of divine presence, then understanding the difference between sowing to the flesh and sowing to the spirit becomes more apparent to us. Because if we can let divine mind take over the scientific government of our being, then that is your optimal position of performance. That is what in yoga we will call thinking right. Everything that you are going to do is going to be backed by principle, backed by the one power in this universe. And that's one of the reasons why we say that human dominion is simply God's perfect law. Now, all we have to do is attune ourselves to the presence of this law, and then we will be in harmony with the perfection of being. Because we are accepting the testimony of our senses, because we are living out from the material moorings of our five sense thoughts, that's what becomes the origins of all of our problems. So in order for us to really get out from being controlled by this belief in two powers and the hypnotism that comes with it, We really have to focus on a belief in this one power. Spirit is all. That Spirit is everywhere and in everything. And every Sunday, that's exactly what we talk about when we are reading the Isha Upanishad.
Right. Well, I'm looking here at our notes for today's program, and I see that you have a quote by Mrs. Eddy from Christian Science from her works called Miscellany. Did you want to read that for our listeners, and then we can talk more about it?
Yeah, she says, to live so as to keep human consciousness in constant relation with the divine, the spiritual, and the eternal, is to individualize infinite power. And this is Christian Science. So you can see that Mary Baker Eddy's Christian Science is identical to the spiritual science of Kriya Yoga that we practice and we've been talking about. That's one of the reasons why I remember when I first read Science in Health with Key to the Scriptures, and while reading the book, I thought I could have written the book, except for one minute detail, that Mary Baker Eddy demonstrates divine law. She doesn't just present it as a theory. She doesn't just talk about it. And she puts healing on the table. She says that if you cannot heal, you do not understand yourself spiritually. And the more I work with the principles that she has revealed to us in her work, the more I understand exactly how this whole thing works. And it's not guesswork, that it is a very exact, definitive science. But it is contingent upon how we're thinking.
What I get from that, too, is like our religions today are solely based on conduct. We must do good. We must move away from doing bad. And in Christian Science, it's not like that. It's much more scientific. It's much more of a relationship with a divinity, as is yoga.
Right. That's one of the things that she came up against, is that when she discovered Christian Science and she presented her discovery to the other denominations of Christianity, it was met with a stiff arm in front, because that was a huge threat. Because like you said, the old theology, the way that we are approaching what we call religion is just a belief system. And as a belief system, it really falls under the heading of the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus, because it really doesn't have any kind of divine power behind it. There's no demonstration of divine law. Everything is based on belief. Well, Mary Baker Eddy really tries to show us that we can believe in anything. And in fact, our belief in sickness is what manifests our sicknesses. And our belief in lack and our belief in death is what really causes all of these things to externalize in our experience. But in reality, none of that is true. That the truth of our being is that we are made in the image and likeness of the divine. We are eternal spiritual beings. And for us to assume that identity changes the external picture of this physical experience.
And then, as you were saying, by accepting that too, it gets us closer to our own godliness, our own connection, and then therefore we can have that constant, prayerful relationship.
And isn't that optimal? Who wouldn't want to live out from eternal happiness? Not happiness that could become misery, but to be continuously happy in a continuous state of love, and to be living out from the perfection of being, to never want, to never need, to never seek anything. See, that's the promise of Scripture, and that's the function of the demonstration of divine law. But most of us are ignorant to the fact that that's even available to us.
Well, I see in our notes, there's another quote here I think we should talk about, and it's by Paul Stark Seeley. Did you want to talk about that with our listeners next?
Yeah, we can talk about it. And I have several from Paul Stark Seeley. The first one here is, intelligence and power become ours in the measure that we realize our true self's living unity with God. And I think once we start to see the miracle of divine presence, once you start to see that the connection is found in the thought unity between divine mind and the real man, the real person. And again, in order for us to activate this connection that is there, we have to turn to it. We have to recognize the presence of it. And then, of course, the more fidelity we have to the presence of this invisible, intangible, sustaining infinite, then the more we'll start to be able to demonstrate it.
So the next statement from Paul Stark Seeley we have is, the contact is found in the thought unity which exists between mind, and that's with a capital M, and the real man. He realizes that he thinks because God is his mind, that he lives because God is his life. And I think that's a pretty profound statement. I want to know maybe if you could explain that a little bit further for us.
Yeah, see, what we want to start to do is we want to start to experience this. I mean, it's one thing to say, I and the Father are one. It becomes a quotation, becomes a statement that we make. But when you actually experience this unity, when it dawns on you that you are God's reflection, that you are made in the image and likeness of the divine. Now, where is this unity? Where does it take place? And it takes place in mind with a capital M. Ames Knoll gave us what Mary Baker Eddy meant by when she said, man is God's reflection. That reflection, by definition, is mind considering its own content. So we can be individual and at the same time the origins of every one of us, of everything that appears in our senses, is really this divine mind. And the more that we start to understand ourselves as being the reflection of this one divine life, then we start to activate the laws that come with divine recognition.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love how you have summed up one of the last of our notes, and you have written, the visible is the evidence of what we carry in the invisible. And I think that's a great summary for our program today.
Yeah, because, again, that's another way of saying how we think is what we become. But more and more we have to start to understand that there are different modes of thinking. There are different ways that we are experiencing this divine mind. And if we are doing it humanly, then our perception is limited. And that's why it's so important to have a system, to have a way of activating this relationship with the divine, acknowledging that what is invisible and intangible is the only thing that is real in our experience. And that, for a lot of us, is a hard thing to get your mind around. But one of the things you're going to learn is you cannot understand the absolute in the rational.
Well, that's why we need you to help keep us on point. So with that, I think we have to start closing down our show for today. So listeners, be sure to access our website, www.ipdtransform.com. There's a lot of tools there that you can click on and read to further your spiritual developments. Don't forget, Swami has a free webinar Wednesdays at noon. and also Facebook Live episodes we do Wednesday nights at 5 p.m. So, Swami, with that, any final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to stay in the spirit of truth and maintain that constant relationship with the presence of this miracle of the divine. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good day. Namaste.
And thank you for listening to The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.